The alarm hit before I even opened my eyes. A hard metal scream tearing through the corridor, the kind of sound that means the ship is dying somewhere close by. I rolled off the bunk and hit the floor already running, because on a transport like this, a second of hesitation is the difference between a scare and a funeral. My name is Owen Miles. I was the only human on board the transport ship Halveth Run, a cargo and passenger vessel carrying a group of Kesh refugees away from a mining colony that had lost its power grid 3 days earlier. 40 passengers, tall, pale-skinned, breathing a thin mix of gases through slits along their necks instead of lungs like mine. I was hired as a technician. Nobody hires a technician expecting to become the last line of defense for 40 lives, but that is exactly what the next 20 minutes made me. The corridor lights flickered red, then steadied, then flickered again. I could hear the hiss before I even reached the cargo bay door, a thin whistling sound that told me exactly what was happening. Something outside had torn a hole through the hull, and the ship was losing air fast. I slammed my palm against the panel, and the door groaned open. What I saw made my stomach drop. A jagged crack ran along the far wall of the cargo bay, right where the reserve air lines fed into the passenger section. Sparks spat from a broken conduit, and in the middle of the room, pressed against the far wall, were the Kesh passengers, clutching each other, eyes wide with a fear that needed no translation. An elder among them, a woman named Sora Vel, turned to me. Her voice came out strained, thin, fighting against the drop in pressure. "You have to fix it," she said. "Please." I did not answer right away. I was already moving toward the control panel, running numbers in my head. The reserve line was cracked at the joint, which meant the automatic seal had failed, which meant the ship's main computer would try to reroute air from the crew section to compensate. That would buy time, maybe 6 minutes before both sections ran critically low. 6 minutes was not enough. Not for 40 people in one repair job that would normally take 20. I checked the manual valve override, and my hand froze on the lever. If I closed the valve to stop the main leak, I would cut airflow completely to this section, meaning I would be trading their air for time to fix the actual break outside. And to fix a hull breach from outside, in vacuum, without a suit rated for that kind of exposure, was something no manual ever recommended. There was only one suit locker on this level. I sprinted for it, boots slamming against the metal floor, and threw it open. Empty. The suit had been pulled for maintenance the day before and never replaced. I remember standing there for 2 full seconds just staring at the empty locker like it might change its answer if I looked hard enough. It did not. Behind me, a young Kesh boy started coughing, a wet rattling sound that meant the air thinning around him was already doing damage. His name was Ilo. I had spoken to him twice during the voyage, mostly about the stars, because he liked asking questions about where humans came from. He looked at me now with the same wide-eyed curiosity, except this time it was laced with panic. I made a decision then that I did not have time to second guess. I told Sora Vel to gather everyone into the rear passenger pod, the smallest sealed compartment on this level, because a smaller space would hold breathable air longer once I redirected what was left. She hesitated only a moment before ushering the others through the narrow hatch, guiding children first, the older passengers close behind. I grabbed the one emergency rebreather mask mounted near the control panel, the only one built to fit a human face, and instead of putting it on myself, I pressed it into Ilo's hands as he passed me. "Breathe through this," I said. "Just breathe." He did not understand at first, staring at the mask like it was a strange gift he had not asked for. I closed his fingers around the strap and pushed him gently toward the hatch. He went, still looking back at me with those wide eyes, and I turned away before I could think too hard about what I had just given up. The hatch sealed behind them with a heavy clunk, and the pressure alarm shifted pitch, a small mercy telling me the compartment was holding. Now it was just me, a cracked hull, and air running out fast. I moved to the emergency toolkit bolted near the airlock and grabbed a thermal sealant kit and a length of patch alloy, the kind meant for quick hull repairs in a real emergency, not the slow, careful jobs I usually did in dock. My ears had already started to ache from the dropping pressure. My breath came out foggy in front of me, which meant the temperature in the bay was falling as fast as the air pressure. I reached the outer access hatch that led to the exposed section of hull where the breach had formed. There was no time to suit up even if a suit had been available. The vacuum beyond that hatch would hit like a wall of ice and silence the moment I stepped through. I took the deepest breath I could manage, feeling my lungs strain against air that was already too thin, and shoved the hatch release. Cold does not describe what hit me. It was more like the world reaching in and pulling the warmth straight out of my body in one motion. My vision narrowed instantly, the edges going dark. The only thing bright and clear was the jagged tear in the hull ahead of me, faint vapor still leaking from it into open space. I do not remember deciding to move. My body just did it, dragging itself forward through instinct alone, hands finding the patch alloy and slapping it hard against the widest part of the crack. My fingers had already gone numb, clumsy, refusing to cooperate the way I needed them to. The sealant kit hissed as I triggered it, spraying a thick foam that expanded and hardened almost instantly against the metal. It was not a perfect fix. It would never pass a real inspection. But it held. The whistling stopped. I do not know how long I stood there afterward, staring at my own handiwork, chest burning, vision tunneling harder with every passing second. I remember trying to turn back toward the hatch and finding my legs would not answer properly. I remember thinking, in a strange detached way, that the deck was coming up to meet me far too fast. Then there was nothing. The next thing I knew was warmth, real warmth, the kind that comes from actual breathable air moving steadily through working lungs. My chest hurt with every inhale, like my ribs had been used as a drum. There was a soft hum nearby, steady and mechanical, the sound of a working ship rather than a dying one. I opened my eyes to a low ceiling and a face leaning over me that was not human. Soravelle sat beside the cot I was lying on, her expression unreadable at first, until I noticed the faint tremble in her hands folded in her lap. "You are awake," she said. My throat felt raw, but I managed a response. Barely. She let out a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been something closer to relief. "On Kesh," she said, "we do not have a word for what you did. Give away the very air keeping you alive, for a stranger's child, and then walk into the cold to save the rest of us with your bare hands." I tried to sit up and immediately regretted it, my body protesting every movement. "We do not really have a word for it either," I admitted. "We just do it first and argue about what to call it later." She studied me for a long moment, something shifting behind her eyes, and then she told me the rest of the story I had missed while unconscious. The rescue ship had picked up our distress signal less than 10 minutes after the breach began, already close because of an earlier evacuation route through this same sector. When they arrived, they found the Halveth Run venting a thin stream of atmosphere from a hastily sealed patch, and a group of 40 Kesh passengers alive inside a rear compartment breathing recycled air through one human-sized rebreather mask passed hand to hand among the children first. They also found me collapsed just inside the airlock, skin far colder than it should have been, barely breathing on my own. The rescue captain, a woman named Grace Sutton, had personally overseen getting me stabilized before the transfer, refusing to let her medical crew treat me as anything less than critical, even as they worked through dozens of Kesh passengers needing care of their own. When I later thanked her for that, she brushed it off simply, saying that anyone willing to freeze an open vacuum for strangers earns the first spot in line without needing to ask for it. Elo, the boy I had given the mask to, came to see me once I was strong enough to sit upright without the room spinning. He walked in slowly, almost shy, holding the same rebreather mask in both hands like it was something precious rather than simple equipment. "You gave this to me," he said, more of a statement than a question. I nodded. "Figured you needed it more than I did right then." He looked down at the mask, turning it slightly in his hands. "My people do not do that," he said quietly. "When air runs short, the strongest keep what they have. That is how we survive hard times. Nobody blames them for it." I did not really have anything clever to say to that, so I just told him the truth. "Where I come from, we do not always think that way. Sometimes the strongest one is supposed to make sure everyone else gets a chance first, even if it costs him." He was quiet for a while after that, turning the idea over the way kids do when they are chewing on something bigger than they expected. Then he asked if all humans thought like that, or if I was simply strange even among my own people. I told him I honestly was not sure, but that I liked to believe most of us would try. Word of what had happened aboard the Halveth Run spread through the rescue ship faster than I expected. By the time I was cleared to walk the halls without an escort, more than a few Kesh passengers stopped me just to look at me for a moment, sometimes nodding, sometimes simply staring like they were trying to understand a puzzle that did not quite fit the shape of their world. Soravelle found me again near the observation deck a few days later, watching the stars slide past through the reinforced window. She stood beside me quietly before speaking. "Among my people, there is a belief that a life saved creates a debt," she said. "The one who is saved owes something back to the one who saved them. I confess I do not know what debt could ever match what you gave that day." I shook my head. I did not do it expecting anything back. That is kind of the whole point. She considered that for a long moment, watching the same stars I was. "Perhaps," she said finally, "that is exactly why it means so much to us. A gift given with no expectation of return is rare. Rarer still when it comes from someone who barely knew us at all." I thought about Ilo clutching that mask, About Soravel ushering children through a narrow hatch with her own hands shaking. About the cold vacuum pulling the warmth from my body while I pressed patch alloy against a dying ship with numb fingers that barely worked. None of it had felt heroic in the moment. It had just felt necessary, the only choice that made any sense when the alternative was watching people I barely knew suffocate, while I stood by holding the one thing that might have saved me instead. Grace Sutton found me not long after that conversation, walking briskly down the corridor with a datapad under one arm, the kind of energy that suggested she never really stopped moving, even when the ship was calm. "You gave quite a show back there," she said, a small smile pulling at the corner of her mouth. "My crew has not stopped talking about it." Technician pulls a hull patch with bare hands in open vacuum after giving away his only air supply. That is not exactly standard procedure. Standard procedure did not have an answer for what was happening, I told her, so I made one up. She studied me for a moment, the humor fading into something more serious. "You know you should not have survived that, right? The exposure alone should have done more damage than it did. Whatever kept you breathing during those last few seconds before we found you, it was not something we can put in a manual." I did not have an answer for that either. Maybe it was luck. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe some part of me simply refused to let go until I knew the others were safe, even if my body was ready to give out long before my mind was. The Kesh passengers were eventually transferred to a proper settlement further along the transit route, a place with better facilities, and room enough for all 40 of them to start rebuilding something like a normal life again. Before they left the rescue ship, several of them came to find me, one after another, offering small gestures of thanks in their own ways. Some brought woven strips of fabric from their belongings. Others simply pressed a hand to their chest, a Kesh gesture I later learned meant a debt remembered rather than repaid. Elo was the last to say goodbye. He held out the rebreather mask to return it, but I told him to keep it instead. "Consider it a reminder," I said, "that sometimes the ones you least expect will give up everything to make sure you get to keep going." He held onto it tightly, nodding without saying anything else, and then followed the others toward the transfer shuttle. I stayed on the observation deck long after they had gone, watching the stars shift slowly as the rescue ship adjusted its course toward the nearest supply station. My hands still ached faintly from the cold, a dull reminder of just how close that entire situation had come to ending very differently. Grace Sutton joined me there eventually, leaning against the railing beside me without saying much at first. "You know," she said after a while, "most people in your position would have grabbed that mask for themselves the second things went wrong. Nobody would have blamed you for it. You were the only human on that ship. No one back home would have ever known the difference." "I would have known," I told her simply. She nodded slowly, like that answer settled something she had been turning over in her mind since she first read the incident report. Then she pushed off the railing and gave me a small, respectful nod before heading back toward the bridge, leaving me alone with the stars and the quiet hum of a ship finally moving toward safety instead of away from disaster. I thought about that moment for a long time afterward, the way the whole thing had unfolded so fast that there had barely been time to think, only time to act. I thought about Ilo's wide eyes as he took that mask from my hands, about Soravel guiding her people through a narrow hatch with a strength that belied her trembling hands, about the way the cold had tried to take everything from me, before I managed to seal that breach shut with nothing but instinct and desperation driving me forward. None of it had felt like heroism while it was happening. It had simply felt like the only choice that made sense, the kind of choice that does not leave room for hesitation once the alternative becomes clear. 40 lives depending on a decision made in the space of a few frantic heartbeats, and somehow, against every reasonable expectation, all of us had made it through. Sometimes I still think about how close it came to going the other way, how a few more seconds of hesitation, a few degrees colder, a slightly wider crack in that hull, might have changed everything. But it did not. We made it. Ilo made it. Soravel and every single one of those 40 Kesh passengers made it, carried through by a decision that cost me nearly everything I had in that moment, but gave all of them a chance to see another sunrise. And if I am ever faced with a choice like that again, standing between someone else's survival and my own comfort, I already know which way I will choose. Some decisions are not really decisions at all. They are simply who you choose to be when everything else falls away, and the only thing left standing between life and loss is the willingness to give up your own last breath, so someone else gets to keep theirs.